Hello and welcome to this very special interview. Almost 10 days after presenting his fourth budget, it looks like one of the biggest stakeholders, the RBI, doesn't seem to be validating it too much. Is that frustrating or perplexing? What about the bit about tax terror and the speculation around the divestment figures being very high? Also, what about politics? Is this going to be a referendum on demonetization, or can Finance Minister Jaitley convince the electorate otherwise? For that and a lot more, it's indeed my pleasure and honor to have Mr. Jaitley right here with us on ET Now. Thank you very much for being with us, sir. The budget has been well received. Everybody's called it balanced and prudent, barring the opposition, and we'll come to that in just a bit. Most stakeholders, whether it's markets, corporate India, have voted in favor of the budget. They believe it was a balanced exercise. But one stakeholder, which is the RBI, seems to have turned very hawkish. Are you perplexed? Is this discouraging?
Well, normally I don't comment on the RBI's decision. They are a professional institution.
Indeed.
With a lot of institutional experience. And we move on the assumption that they are best suited to take these decisions. And now we must bear in mind that this decision is one of a monetary policy committee. And therefore they weigh all circumstances. Now, 2 policies ago they had reduced the rates.
That's right.
Thereafter, immediately after the demonetization exercise was over in the month of January, the banks had taken some initiative. And therefore that movement is on. Now, RBI has followed a cautious approach, but that's their prerogative. I think let's wait. This is not the last policy on the matter, and I'm
Indeed.
sure in an evolving situation, the RBI would continue to take further decisions.
You are perhaps being the gracious finance minister you are, and you're not essentially saying that I'm walking the talk on growth alone, but I am going to point out what the markets have spent a little bit of time over, which is, it's all right, they didn't have to cut rates because the banks are doing their bit, lending rates have come down. But the change in stance has taken a lot of people by surprise. From being accommodative to being neutral essentially means that they're giving themselves elbow room to both reduce and hike rates if need be. I'm presuming that's not the validation that you were looking for, because they say fiscal prudence was very good, but still they haven't seemed to endorse it.
I can have my own assessment of the situation, particularly in view of the fact that inflation is well within the range.
Right.
And not only it's well within the range, it's within even the 4% range.
Yes.
We have the flexibility from 2 to 6%, but this one is at the moment a little below 4%. But then I think we must leave it to the RBI's judgment. They know the best how to move, and in case situations evolve and change, the RBI will certainly be moving along with times. There have been instances in the past where I would have said that my own assessment could have been different. But then we don't express that ever, because we leave it to the RBI's wisdom.
The reason why I asked that question, sir, it's no longer just one man's discretion. This is the Monetary Policy Committee, and the whole idea of appointing the committee, which you eventually did, was to have vibrancy of views, was to have people who would bat for growth as well. While fiscal policy seems to be batting for growth, monetary policy seems to be very hawkish.
There is no reason for us to assume that the 6 members would not have discussed all these aspects. I'm quite certain that within the committee meeting, they would have discussed all these aspects, and when they come out with a particular decision, that's the collective wisdom.
Right.
And once such bodies meet, it's not necessary for people to even annex contrarian views. They take a broad consensus. I really don't know how they voted, because those proceedings are still not out. But I'm quite certain that when 6 people with a certain amount of both academic and experience credentials meet, they would have taken in all the relevant considerations in mind.
So there's a reason why I ask you that question. I think demonetization paved the way for the banks to cut lending rates, and we saw substantial cut happen. 90 basis points is almost a percentage point cut there. But many people believe as remonetization happens and MCLR goes up, banks may perhaps be forced to push rates upwards. Will that?
Well, I think
is that a concern you share?
No. I would personally always like the rates to moderate, because once the rates moderate themselves, they help us in growth, they help us in increasing the amount of credit, increasing the amount of lending, making it more affordable. So I would personally, I've always said I would prefer to see that. But then the RBI has the onerous responsibility of balancing it with inflation and their own concerns. I'm sure they've done a balancing act, keeping in view what's happened over the last 4 months or so. So let's wait for how RBI proceeds in the months to come.
So unlike the former finance minister and your predecessor, you don't believe the RBI is not believing in your budget, and which is why they have taken this call?
Well, I believe in talking with the RBI. I believe in communicating with the RBI. And therefore, I'll have my own style of dealing with the RBI.
Fair point indeed, sir. But one last question before I move on to the budget per se. It's been 41 days since the whole demonetization drive ended. It's a little perplexing that we don't have a final figure from the RBI just yet. Are you as disturbed about not having a final figure?
Not in the least.
Why not?
You see, the RBI's final figure can't be an approximation. The RBI has huge amount of currencies of high denominational notes from all over the country which has come in.
Right.
This is lakhs and lakhs of crores of rupees. Now, unlike a broad assessment that they would give earlier, that in the currency chest so much money has come in today.
Which they did in December.
Now they have through their machines to count every note.
That's right.
Take out a possible suspicious note or a fake note out. And then out of the residual currency, give the balance of how much really has come in. It's a huge exercise. It's not an exercise which can be over either in weeks or in a month or so. It's an exercise which will take a reasonable amount of time. The RBI can give you at some stage an approximate figure, but that would lead to a speculation. So I think let's leave it to the RBI. Once that final tally is complete, it's only then they would give it. On a lighter note, I told the Congress party friends in Parliament that counting these notes is a little more complicated than counting the size of the Congress parliamentary party. There's a difference between the two. So you can't do it on the
I'm not going to get political right away, but I will in a bit from now. Just to go back to GDP numbers and what you projected, a lot of your budget mathematics this time around is based on the economic survey numbers, which is not statistical data because there wasn't statistical data that was available. In that sense, did you find it tough to prepare this year's budget? I mean, given domestic factors, demonetization must have taken a hit.
I don't think so. First of all, let me tell you on the GDP. You see, demonetization of this kind and a consequent remonetization really has no fixed model. There is no rule book.
Indeed.
There is no past experience. And therefore, there is a lot of assessments which economists have been making and various professional institutions have been making. Secondly, there is a lot of counting that remains outside the GDP, particularly of the informal economy.
Exactly, yes.
Thirdly, there is a lot of integration of the informal which is taking place with the formal. And therefore, when you look at the formal sectors of the economy, where you'll find the figures completely different.
Right.
Why should the airline traffic have increased in November and December? How has the sowing increased? How have the four-wheel sales increased? Then coming from the informal sector where the spending takes place, the two-wheelers have gone down. So you can see that particular difference. And I think therefore if the World Bank, the IMF, the CSO, the Chief Economic Advisor have all given their assessments, I broadly take the tenor of all these assessments, which effectively is that in the short run, you'll have a squeeze and its impact. But in the medium and the long-term run, the size of the formal economy will increase, the revenues will increase, and the GDP officially will increase. And that's a gamble, that's a factor which we factored in when we took this particular decision.
Right.
Now, on preparing this year's budget, I don't think this was as complex an exercise as has been made out. First of all, our revenue figures are intact. Last 2 years, we've grown by 17%. This year, we factored it at 12%.
That's right.
This 12% does not take into account the revenue growth, either what may come as additional dividend or the possible impact of demonetization
On tax collections.
on tax collections, which after the first few months could be significantly larger.
Right.
There is a second variable also, which is once in the middle of the year the GST gets implemented. After the initial hiccups, the GST itself could lead to larger collections. Now,
Indeed.
both these factors, we've not really taken the full impact of them.
You've been more conservative than...
Now, what are the areas we had to spend on? We had to spend on rural areas and agriculture. We had to increase the amount of social sector spending. We had to increase the quantum of spending on infrastructure. Now, this year, infrastructure spending is 3,96,000 crores in the coming year. Now, this used to be the entire planned expenditure which the UPA used to undertake in a year. That's the infrastructure.
And doing away with that discrimination has given you the flexibility.
And it gives us that flexibility. And then you decide the fiscal policy, the taxation policy accordingly, which are the areas into which you can make the contribution. I didn't tinker with indirect taxes for the simple reason that after the first 3 months, in any case, if the GST is to be implemented, there is no point tinkering with the indirect taxes for a period of only 3 months.
I think you've got a big thumbs up as far as doing a balanced budget is concerned, and I think at one level it will be frustrating for people to question the hygiene of your numbers. I'm going to leave it at that, but if I may turn focus to spending, I buy your point that your intention is to spend more, but data seems to suggest otherwise. And just to quote Mr. Chidambaram in Parliament yesterday, and I will let you have a retort here, which we haven't heard from you till now. As a percentage of GDP, spending is being contracted. That's the allegation that's coming in from the Congress party. They believed it was 13.6% in budgeted estimates for fiscal year 17. It's 12.74% in 18.
See, you have to relate it to the quantum of money which is available.
Available, yeah.
If I spend beyond my means, then I'll land up at the UPA rate of fiscal deficit of 6.5.
And you wouldn't want to do that?
I wouldn't want to do that. So I had to maintain a certain amount of fiscal discipline, consistently inheriting a bad quality figure of 4.6% of fiscal deficit just 2.5 years ago. We've gradually brought it down to 3.2%. We intend to move down further. At the same time, within the volume of taxes available, quantum-wise, numerically it has to increase. And thirdly, on spending, my track record is significantly different from what's happened in the past. In the past, the budget estimates and the revised estimates, there was a huge difference. Yesterday, I cited figures to say that over 1 lakh of crores used to be slashed in the development expenditure each year
to meet the fiscal deficit target.
To meet the fiscal targets. On the contrary, in the last 2 years, my revised estimates are much more than my budget estimates. And therefore, I'd rather be conservative and then err on the right side by spending more rather than just cutting and slashing expenditure at the end of the year.
So as somebody who likes to be conservative, was it a frustrating exercise to go to 3.2? Wouldn't you rather have had stuck to 3%? Because it can be read as a sign of weakness.
One had to do a proper balancing act. Fiscal consolidation is necessary. You don't have to leave the next generation in such heavy debt because you want to spend a lot more today.
Right.
It sends, the absence of fiscal consolidation and fiscal discipline sends a very negative signal into the market. And if central government doesn't maintain that fiscal discipline, the states in any case are saying, allow me to reach the FRBM target. And then there would be no end to it. Therefore, you had to continue the downward movements. The markets were willing to overlook the difference between 3 and 3.2.
In fact, you've outdone the market. They were expecting 3.4, you've just done 3.2.
See, in the year of possible GST and in the year immediately after demonetization, when the world has slowed down and the need to spend is there, I think the target of reducing 0.5 in 1 year and even
you can't be obsessed with it.
And then maintaining a pause at 3%. I think was a little extraordinary, and therefore instead of maintaining, coming down from 3.5 to 3, we chose a more safer course, 3.5 to 3.2 and finally to 3.
You've almost walked the talk as far as divestment is concerned. I think just 2 days back you've sold about 2% stake in ITC, which was held by Asuti. Will we see more stake sale that you hold in companies via SOOTI?
You would, for the reason. You see, I've always said that disinvestment is the art of the possible.
Yes.
You go in for strategic sales, you go in for asset sale, you go for buyback, you go in for selling a small percentage of shares into the market. And you do it without stepping on too many toes. I think what I learned from the experience of the first NDA government was that in a period of 5 years, at that government, we disinvested about 28,000 crores. And every day there was some controversy relating to disinvestment. At the end of the day, when 2004 elections were held, there is a sizable vote amongst the working class that we lost.
That's
because
right,
we made too much noise of this. Today we are quietly doing it without any controversy, without any confrontationist policies. For example, this current year, in one single year, I would have divested worth 45,000 crores.
Yes. Yeah.
We are almost close to 40,000 at the moment as I speak to you. Next year, I have a more ambitious target, and I think it's achievable for the reason that last year we took a decision to list the GIC companies,
That's right.
5 of them.
Yes.
Now, under the SEBI listing guidelines, the government holding has now to come down from 100 to 74.
That's right.
So I already have an agenda where there are companies with very high valuation. And this year I have said a lot of other PSUs, including the railway PSUs, are going to be listed.
That's right.
So if IRTC, etc., which is the most visited site in India, if it gets listed and its market valuations are taken, I think sky's the limit as far as that company is concerned.
And why should you not tap revenues that are readily available? But is there so much appetite for government paper that could hit markets next fiscal?
Well, I think the appetite of the market also has to be seen. And our experience has been in all the divestments we've done so far, that both domestic institutions, FIIs, as also small investors have shown a lot of interest because a lot of these are very valuable shares.
And CPSE ETF is one of those things. But sir, you know, the 2% stake sale in ITC, for instance, a lot of people are, there are two questions that I want to ask you. One, LIC ended up picking it. Would you want that trend to change, and why LIC all the time? And the second thing is, why keep your stakes in SOOTI at all? Will we see the government divest SOOTI completely?
Well, I'm not going to make any comments on that because this influences the markets. As I said, it's an art of the possible, and at this stage, keeping these 2% shares, divesting it and letting the LIC at some subsequent stage, the LIC also takes commercial decisions with regard to how much to retain and when to divest.
Right.
That's a methodology of by which governments have acted in the past also.
Indeed. You brought in a lot of relief as far as corporate tax for the small and medium companies are concerned in one shot. I think it's the big business that is wondering when will you walk the talk that you promised on reducing. Is that on the table? Because you've got 2 more years in this stage.
I had said that this will be coupled with the exemptions going out.
Right.
Now, let me make it very clear. At the moment, the exemptions have not gone out because I don't intend to lift the exemptions ahead of time. And since I don't intend lifting them ahead of time, today, as far as the large companies are concerned, the average tax that they are paying is already around 25%.
And even less, 22 or something.
Less, they are not paying 30%. And as far as the smaller 96% companies are concerned, the MSME plus, as I call it,
right, yes.
The average tax they are paying is 30%. So those paying 30% would be entitled to this relief, and not those already paying 25%.
So, is it fair to presume that for big business, it's off the table for now?
Well,
Till exemptions.
I think that's my original decision. I had never announced an absolute decision. It was always linked to exemptions.
You've also made changes as far as the long-term capital gains tax on immovable assets are concerned. So, there is some parity between unlisted shares, immovable assets. Contrary to expectations in the markets, you did not tinker with long-term capital gains for listed shares. Is it imminent in the next budget?
Well, I won't comment on that.
Or do you believe you did not want to rattle markets too much?
Well, I won't comment on that because this can lead to any speculations.
I want to go back to a point that you made, sir, which is indirect taxes. You did not want to tinker because they will be GST maybe 3 months or 4 months or 5 months down the line. In hindsight do you believe, because this budget also had to boost demand, you could have perhaps reduced indirect taxes in the interim before the GST happens?
Well, I think for a period of 3 months, the impact would be insignificant. And there was no point taking those insignificant demands. I therefore followed the alternative route of putting more money in the hands of some of the
taxpayers,
the MSME, the small taxpayers, etc. Not only the small taxpayers. You see, if you historically see all the budgets in the last 70 years, the next day's headline used to be, what will cost more?
That's right, yes.
Now here I have not increased the burden on anyone.
You took away a big share of our TV screens.
Yeah, I have not increased the tax on anyone. And effectively, almost every segment in the income tax bracket individual pays a little less. The smaller ones, I have reduced it by half. Those in the 20% and 30% bracket get a 12,500 relief each, and 12,500 relief is an important relief.
Significant for most of us. When do you honestly see the GST kick in? I know you made significant progress with...
We made significant progress. We are meeting again on the 18th, and thereafter we'll have to have series of meetings. I intend to make an effort to take the legislations into Parliament in the second part of the budget session. And if we are able to do that, the GST Council's decision is the 1st of July. And in any case, you see, the only debate therefore can be between 1st of July or 15th of September. There is no room beyond that for the GST to be delayed.
Sir, I'm going to ask you a very candid question. All your 4 budgets have been geared towards crowding in private sector investment. You've let public sector be the engine of growth with an idea to crowd in private investment. But there is no sign of a spur in private investment. I'm asking you 2 questions. Is that frustrating? And when do you see that happen? Because credit to industrials is negative. There's no gross capital formation.
I'll tell you, I think this should also be a cause for introspection for what's happened which has led to this situation. One, it's the global situation where the demand is low. So I can understand that that's a circumstance beyond our control or beyond the control of India's private sector. 2, during the boom period, the banks had lent indiscriminately to a particular group of private sector large industries. Now most of them have surplus capacities and the demand is low.
Right.
And therefore their ability to invest more
and they're all over leveraged, yes.
Banks' capacity, because their monies are blocked here,
is also squeezed.
And therefore, in one sense, it is that overspent lending by the banks and these companies expanding beyond their ability, coupled with the continuous global slowdown, I think is leading to a situation where private investment is slow. To that extent, you are right, it could be frustrating. But then those in government have no right ever to feel frustrated. They have to act.
Right.
Therefore, we keep increasing public investment. We keep spending on infrastructure. We keep spending in the rural areas, hoping that demand will boost up.
Right.
We keep spending on various sectors so that which will spur some activity as far as the private sector is concerned.
Right.
This is absolutely necessary under the circumstances.
Right. I'm going to ask you, while at banks, sir, a lot of people were surprised that for recap, you've kept a very little amount. Is this because the bad bank is in the making that your CA has been
I'll tell you,
batting for?
Let me just tell you.
Right.
I'll answer both these questions. As far as this 10,000 is concerned, this is a part of the original Indradhanush scheme. 25, 10 and 10. So this year was the 10. If more is needed, we'll try and make more available. But having said this, there are various options which we have tried. Ultimately, the banks themselves also have to act, the companies have to act and bring about settlements, transfer of ownerships, etc. An activity which has started. You see, let the bad bank idea be debated. But it should not lead to a situation where effectively it becomes an ARC run by the government.
Yeah.
Because once an ARC is, today you have established ARCs.
Right.
There are vibrant private sector ARCs. We've expanded investment into those ARCs, foreign investment is allowed, etc.
Right.
And now some ARCs have started effectively functioning. We haven't seen the full impact of that at the moment.
True.
Now, in between, if the government jumps in and says, I establish my ARC,
it's going to be counterproductive.
no, then by next year, you'll have all these left parties and the Trinamool Congress and so on saying, the ARC must be supported and the rehabilitation must come out of the budget.
That's true.
Because at the end of the day, when government enters these businesses...
And it's an unnecessary liability for the government to take.
Let's be very clear. In the airline sector, let's take this as an example. There are private sector airlines. We are not supporting any one of them.
That's right.
We are not supporting any one of the airports. But because we run one airline ourselves, it must be supported out of the budget.
That's right.
Because we are running the railways ourselves, 55,000 crores from the budget must go into the railways. So before we just take this as a slogan, we must be very clear that this is not going to be effectively some form of an ARC supported by the budget itself. If an arrangement dehors that can be made, I am quite willing to and open to discuss this.
If you weren't supporting the railways with 55,000 crore outlay, you could have perhaps cut my income tax a little. As the finance minister, who is known to be revolutionary in that sense, isn't privatization of railways crossing the minds of your government at all?
Well, I think there are some ideas whose time comes only at an appropriate time. Today you have already allowed private sector investment into infrastructure.
That's right, yes.
You have outsourced various facilities. So now those kind of activities are on. I think let the consumers and the travelers get the benefit of those facilities.
Right.
You have FDI which has been allowed into infrastructure. You have major international companies which are now going to be manufacturing your locomotives. Your compartments are being, the rolling stock is being manufactured in the private sector at times. Some of the platform and the train services are also outsourced. I think we've gone so far over the last several decades. I think the railway still continues to be with the government.
I'll promise to read between the lines on that answer. But sir, jobs is another issue that bothers the government. While your intention has been very good to create jobs and your manifesto talked about job creation, it's obviously a function of both public and private sector investment. Is it, I'm not going to use the word frustrating, but is it discouraging at one level that you haven't been able to walk the talk on this one?
Jobs don't get created outside the economic system. It's only when the economy does well that jobs are created. So if you invest into the rural areas, jobs get created. If you invest in infrastructure, jobs get created. If you try and boost the economy and boost the MSME sector, jobs get created. If you try and boost through the Mudra and the other Yojanas activity in the smaller sectors, the jobs get created. So these are all areas where you are making an effort in order to see that some kind of economic activity boost takes place and jobs do get created.
Time for a quick breather. There's so much more to cover ground on. We'll be back with this FM interview in a moment from now. It's good to be back with you on this very special show where we're interviewing the finance minister on a whole host of areas, not just the budget, but economy and plenty of politics as well. I will turn focus to something that a lot of people have voiced after the budget was presented. There are these sweeping powers that have been given to the taxman, especially to junior officials. And I think the economic survey also talks about at least talks about a concern about an overreach by the tax authorities. Are you willing to spend some amount of capital there just yet?
Some of the provisions are completely being misunderstood. Now, this overreaction on a provision that the reason to
search and seizure
believe for the satisfaction before a search and seizure will not be disclosed. Obviously, if a court asks for it, it will be disclosed to a court. But then disclosing it to authorities other than a court means what? Your informant's name gets disclosed. Now, once in a search, let us say a partner who's fallen out, or an accountant who's disgruntled, or a family feud If these are the kind of informants, normally we will give you information about tax evasion. Now, any appropriate authority would record his satisfaction and say this is the information and therefore a ground for search is made out.
Right.
The moment you make these our experience has been that these documents used to become public and our sources would completely dry up because for want of disclosure.
Indeed.
Now, just as a journalist doesn't disclose his source, the searching authority in the income tax need not disclose its source. And therefore, what we have said is, if a court asks for it,
but do you fear it could be misused? That's really the concern.
And your stories can also be misused because they may go wrong. That doesn't mean we must blank the channels out. Now, these are all conclusions which are completely impractical. So all that we have done is that this report, on which the satisfaction is based, if a court asks for it in a sealed cover, you can give it to the court to see when our action is supported by reason. But they won't be disclosed to authorities other than a court because then the identity of the informants will become public, and the object of this so-called human rights argument which some people, activists have given, can't be to help economic offenders. Because if this situation is created, there will be no searches at all.
I'll come to economic offenders in just a while, but I think that's a clarification which is very warranted. FIPB reforms have been largely welcome. You've done away with FIPB because this was like this one gate where things were being stalled. Could we not simplify it further? 26, 49, 74, 100, because now it's going to be at the discretion of nodal ministries who may
I'll tell you, today 90% of FDI is automatic route. There is no nodal ministry, there is no finance ministry.
That's right, yes.
These 10% cases, we will now be clarifying the procedure as to how these cases are going to be handled. Now, in most of these cases, there used to be some clearance required from the nodal ministry and with the finance ministry. Now, all that we are doing is by eliminating the FIPB, which has outlived its utility, eventually, you are jumping over one step and just allowing one clearance.
That's right.
Now, where it is regulated, then somebody has to look at it. Now, I think we can trust the appropriate ministries as much as the FIPB could be.
I'm tempted to ask you a question on oil behemoths before I move on to some political questions. Do we have a broad contour of what this oil behemoth will be? Is it just going to be a merger of all these oil entities?
Well, I would rather not comment on it. We've indicated an idea for the future, and I think it's for the Petroleum Ministry now to work on that idea. I think which direction it leads is at least clear to me. I'm sure it's equally clear to you.
Right.
But beyond that, I would not like to clarify.
Fair point indeed, sir. I want to, you spoke about economic offenders, and it's been in the public domain, and Times Network will take some credit for breaking that story, and that wasn't wrong, which is Vijay Mallya writing a letter to your predecessor about restructuring of his loans. The Congress party's response to this has been, this is routine, marked down. You don't
see, I'll tell you, I don't want to go into an individual case.
Right.
But first of all, let us go to the genesis of this NPA problem. It's not the small guys who are defaulting that much. And the small defaults we can live with. The farmers' defaults also we can live with. Bulk of these NPAs are big industries.
Yes.
Monies are concentrated, they were given. They were given essentially around that boom period of the global economy. And now those sectors don't seem to be doing so well. We are trying our best to rectify it. Since 2014, none of these big loans have been given because the banks itself were feeling stressed in giving these loans. And all that the NPAs have increased is that on the past loans, the interests have been increasing and the asset quality review has led to discovery of more loans, which were otherwise not being disclosed. Now, is it the officials alone who were responsible or the bank officers alone which is responsible? The letters indicate, whichever cases have come out, that I think there was a little over-activism as far as the government is concerned. Now, sources tell me that in many cases, it was not even North Block which was active in these cases. It was the political limb of the then government in power, which was more active. They were active in banking appointments, they were active in helping business houses, etc. But somewhere professionalism seems to have taken a back seat.
Right.
Now, whether these bank officials were acting on their own, they were acting on indications which were coming from the top, is an issue to be sorted out. But I think all that happened doesn't speak very highly of the level of professionalism which was being maintained.
I simply buy your point about the political limb being active, but what about the role of the RBI? I mean, shouldn't as a regulator the RBI have kept a more hawkish eye at least on what was happening with banks and restructuring? Do they shoulder some part of this blame?
I can only tell you, when I took over, I received recommendations for a large number of chairpersons to be appointed. And I wanted to know who had cleared these, what was the process. And suddenly I found that nobody, including the RBI, was willing to take responsibility for those names. These were those last-minute clearances which had been granted during the election period. And finally, we had to appoint a committee which comprised of 2 senior secretaries and the RBI governor, and who recommended that most of those appointments be scrapped. This is a telling story on the state of things that was.
But as a regulator, the RBI could have been a little more active. I'm going to turn focus to what is happening or what happened in the House just 2 days back. I know humor, sharp wit, jibes are a part of any vibrant political democracy. But perhaps the raincoat barb that the Prime Minister made was distasteful, like the Congress party says, took the discourse lower. How would you defend that position?
I think the Congress party's reaction has been, is something which lacks maturity. First of all, Parliament is not a dry or a dead forum. It's a political forum.
At least should not be.
In a Parliament debate, the rules which apply are very different from what would apply in a convent school debate. And therefore, the language that you use, the wit, the repartee, the kind of aggression which is involved is entirely at a different plank. We are in politics. Now, I am not giving the argument that, look, the way you attacked the Prime Minister over the last 14 years. I am not going into that argument. I can rattle out all the phrases that the Congress party has used. But at the end of the day, Parliament is a forum where you use satire, where you use left-handed compliments, where you use wit. If you look at the best illustrations in British Parliament, I think historically those are counted. And if some of them were even used in India, I think the Congress party would be boycotting Parliament forever if they got so sanctimonious about it. So they have to reach a certain level of maturity. Let's also remember that there is no pope in Parliament. There are no priests in Parliament.
It isn't a convent.
Everybody there is a politician. So you have to be attacked for where you've gone wrong. You have to be complimented for where you have to where you went the right way. And at times there are left-handed compliments also.
So because it
and therefore, I think if you have the audacity, and why it hurt the Congress party, and I'll tell you the reason. Dr. Manmohan Singh used a phrase that the demonetization is a organized loot and legalized plunder. Now this comment didn't hurt us. It didn't hurt us because it didn't stick. The whole world knew that for 10 years India had seen a very corrupt government. And the present government is perceived to be scam-free. And therefore, if you use phrases like loot and plunder, particularly when you've been a head of a government which had a bad image on the corruption front, your allegation doesn't stick. So the allegation was made. It was just
a part of parliamentary debate.
A parliamentary debate. We took it in the right spirit. We responded.
As somebody who's
now, why did this allegation hurt? Why did what Prime Minister said hurt? It hurt because it was a left-handed compliment, which said that you are a very clean person. That even in the midst of all that dirt which was going on in the last 10 years, you remained clean. Now that's all it meant. Now how is it so objectionable that you would become so sanctimonious, walk out and then say nobody can be criticized? After all, a parliament is not a temple or a church. A parliament is a political establishment
and none of you
where there will be debates of this kind and there will be barbs of this kind which are exchanged.
And none of you are popes or priests. But because it has been, because perhaps it has been felt very personal, will you concede that politics is personal, this is how it's going to be? Or do you believe there is a way there that the Prime Minister can perhaps acknowledge it, that I didn't really mean it like that, and move on?
Why should we? You have a Congress party where its two principal leaders say maut ka saudagar, khoon ki dalali, but besides being vulgar vocabulary, you've used phrases of this kind. Now here, I thought the Prime Minister was at his parliamentary best. He said something in a very nice way about Dr. Manmohan Singh being a clean politician, and at the same time he gave a left-handed compliment about the last government having been a not-so-clean government. Now what's wrong with this, saying this?
Politics should never have a dull day, and it never does. I will ask you a quick question on what's happening in Tamil Nadu, sir. And a lot of people believe that the governor should wait and watch before appointing Ms. Sasikala, who claims to have the numbers. What sort of a watch or a role is the centre playing at this stage?
Well, I don't think the centre has any role at the moment. I'm quite certain that the governor is a very experienced political leader. He knows public administration. The governor will be well advised to go strictly by the Constitution, and I am quite certain that the governor would act strictly in accordance with the Constitution and not do anything which is not in accordance with democratic norms.
Is there merit though in waiting for the Supreme Court verdict, considering?
Well, I think I won't substitute the governor's judgment by giving my own opinion. I think the relevant considerations before any governor in such a situation would be: one, who has the majority? Two, how do you form a stable government? How do you test in a fair manner the majority, which normally is tested in the House? He makes a preliminary assessment himself and then gives people time to prove it in the majority of the House. And in coming to this conclusion, he exercises restraint. He watches the situation, he consults the best of legal minds, he consults all political groups, he watches every aspect of the situation and takes an appropriate decision. And as a very mature, experienced politician, with his past experience both as a member of parliament, as a central minister, I think well versed in public administration, he would be rightly advised, and I'm sure he'll go according to the Constitution.
We do hope Mr. Rao will take the... I have two last questions, sir, and one of them has to expect you to wear your Minister of Corporate Affairs hat, a little out of the league here. But corporate India is seeing all kinds of boardroom battles, whether it was the spat at Tata Sons. I know you wouldn't want to comment on business houses, or whether it's the founder versus the board battle in Infosys. How does this really augur? Because constantly issues of corporate governance are being raised. Do you believe it's time you revisit some of those?
I think the provisions are well in order. The regulatory mechanisms are well in place. And just as you asked me questions on what happened in Parliament, the administration of the corporate world is also corporate democracy. Indeed. So these things will happen, and I think let the institutions which are supposed to administer it run it.
Is this a function of promoters not ready or not willing or not prepared to let go of institutions or companies that they have created? At least in the two big cases.
Why should I make a comment on this? It would depend on an entire company. This phenomenon is true in politics, I can say that. We almost saw it recently in the Samajwadi Party.
we wonder if it's true for corporate India as well.
Why should I comment?
You've actually cued me to my last question because you spoke about Samajwadi, so I am tempted to ask you on elections. This budget was presented in the midst of big 5 state assembly elections that are happening, and you and your party have said this is not really a referendum of demonetization. There are many other issues there. If you do well, will you still say it's not a referendum on demonetization?
There is no election. Every election in India, you see, these are media phrases. Every election is a referendum. And these days I've seen every election is a semi-final.
That's true.
India is yet to see a final.
Yes.
And therefore, I think let the media use these phrases. Elections are contested and won on several issues. They are lost on several issues. And so will this election be.
Mr. Finance Minister, thank you very much for speaking to us.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.